This is Jay Carper from AmericanTorah.com and CommonSenseBibleStudy.com, and this is part 2 of the series A Sabbath to Yahweh. In part 1, we talked about what is the Sabbath, and in part 2, we're going to talk about why does the Sabbath matter. Why does the Sabbath matter? First, because it shows love and respect for God. Second, because it's good for you. Third, because God said to love your neighbor as yourself. And fourth, it's about God's relationship with his people. Let's go back to point 1. Love YHWH, your God. This is from Genesis 2:3. And notice that in this case, instead of quoting from the English Standard Version, I'm quoting from Young's literal translation. And God blesseth the seventh day and sanctifieth it. For in it he hath ceased from all his work which God had prepared for making. The first thing I want you to notice here is that it says God had prepared for making all of his work. He prepared for the 7 days of creation before he even began them. Nothing in that week surprised him. God created light on the day that he meant to. He created the plants on the day that he meant to. And he wasn't surprised that he was finished with creation on the 6th day. It was all part of his plan. He could have created everything in a single instant if he wanted to. But he had a reason for placing each aspect of creation on the day in which he put it. That also means that he wasn't surprised when he was finished. The 7th-day Sabbath was a part of his plan from the very beginning. Before he even started creating the universe, he planned for the Sabbath. When you create a plan, there's a certain way that you're going to go about it. If someone else were to create a plan for the same project, they might put things in a different order. This means that the 6 days of creation and the 7th-day Sabbath were a part of God's character. God put things on the specific days he did because of who he is and how he thinks about the universe. So observing the Sabbath day on the 7th day, as God intended, is an acknowledgement of who God is and how he wants the universe to work. From Exodus 20, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and this commandment is repeated in Deuteronomy 5. God sanctified the Sabbath day from the very beginning. He set it apart, and then he commanded his people to remember it so that they would continue to set it apart. That's what holy means. Holy and sanctified both mean to set something apart from other things. God set the Sabbath day apart from all other days, and then he commanded his people to keep it separate, to never treat the Sabbath like you do every other day. We were created in part to be stewards of God's creation, and that includes the Sabbath. God gave us dominion over the animals and the plants in the earth, and he charged us with taking care of it. He gave us marriage for our benefit and charged us with guarding it. And then he gave us the Sabbath, and he charged us with guarding that too. The Sabbath is the only one of the 10 Commandments that says, remember, but it's also the only one of the 10 Commandments that our theologians tell us to forget. Who should we listen to, God or theologians? From 1 John 5, 2 and 3. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. According to the church fathers, when John wrote this letter, he was living in Ephesus. And this letter was written to the churches of Asia Minor, much like the first couple of chapters of the book of Revelation. Now certainly there were some Jews among those churches, but John's primary audience were Gentile converts, not Jews who had grown up keeping the commandments of God. So when he says, this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, we know that he's also speaking to you and me. Jesus and Paul corrected the traditions of men, not God's commandments. Throughout their ministries, they both taught obedience to God's commandments. Every time that Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees, or if he confronted them, he never corrected or changed God's commandments. He corrected their misunderstandings of those commandments. And then Jesus also said that if you love me, you will keep my commandments. But we know that Jesus' commandments are the same as the Father's commandments. Jesus said that he only came to speak the words of the Father. So if we love Jesus, we'll keep his commandments, which means we'll keep the Father's commandments. And the Father's commandments tell us what it means to love the children of God. If we love Jesus, we love God, and we keep his commandments. And if we keep his commandments, we love each other. When John wrote this letter, one of his purposes was to define the concept of love. How do we know that we love the way that God intends? We know that we love one another the way that God intended when we're keeping his commandments. Exodus 31, verses 13 through 15. Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, YHWH, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to YHWH. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. God's Sabbaths are of paramount importance to him. Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths. In the Hebrew Old Testament, the only days called Sabbaths are the weekly Sabbath and the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. There are other days of rest, but none of them are called Sabbaths. So we know that this is specifically talking about the seventh day of the week. And it even says here, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to YHWH. And why is this day so important to God? Because it's a reminder of who God is to his people. Keep the Sabbath day sanctified, so that you may know that I, YHWH, sanctify you. We are to be a set-apart people in his honor. And as part of our sanctification, we emulate him, and we keep his special day separate and holy from other days. And this is so important that deliberately breaking the Sabbath deserves death. The death penalty in God's law is reserved for serious crimes: murder, adultery, kidnapping, idolatry, homosexuality, bestiality, blasphemy, witchcraft. But how does the Sabbath fit into these other crimes? There's a clear pattern here. All of these things are a direct attack on God's sovereignty. Don't murder because your neighbor bears God's image. Don't commit adultery because marriage is a model of our relationship with God. Don't kidnap people and sell them into slavery because God hasn't given you authority over that person. Don't commit idolatry because your relationship with God is special and unique. Keep the Sabbath day because God set it apart for your benefit. Rejecting the seventh-day Sabbath is a direct attack on God's sovereignty. This is Jake Harper from AmericanTorah.com and CommonSenseBibleStudy.com. In the next video, we'll talk about how the Sabbath is good for you.